30 years of preparation, Admiral Chen replied. Every diplomatic contact, every trade agreement, every seemingly innocent cultural exchange was also an intelligence operation. We learned from every species we met. We adapted every technology we encountered. We improved on everything we found. The human ships were unlike anything Zektar had ever seen. They moved with impossible grace, changing direction and speed in ways that violated everything he knew about space combat. Their hulls seemed to shift and flow like living metal. This is impossible, General Vorth muttered. No species develops this quickly. You made several crucial mistakes, Admiral Chen continued. First, you assumed we were newcomers to space. Humanity has been exploring the galaxy for much longer than we've admitted. We just chose to remain hidden until we were ready. One of the human ships demonstrated its capabilities by performing a maneuver that should have torn it apart. It folded space around itself, appearing instantly on the opposite side of the Keth Mori formation. Second, you assumed we were like the other species you've conquered. Humanity has advantages you don't understand. We adapt faster than most species. We learn from our mistakes. We're very good at holding grudges. Zektar watched his tactical officers try to target the human ships, but their weapon systems couldn't achieve lock-on. The enemy vessels seemed to exist in multiple locations simultaneously. Third, Admiral Chen said, you assumed that because we appeared peaceful we were weak. Humanity has been at war with itself for thousands of years. We understand violence in ways that most galactic species have forgotten. The demonstration began with surgical precision. Human ships targeted the Keth Mori fleet's weapon systems with beams that passed harmlessly through shields, but disabled every offensive capability. Within minutes, Zektar's 1,200 warships had been reduced to harmless hulks floating in space. Your crews are unharmed, Admiral Chen announced. Your ships are disabled but repairable. This is your only warning. Zektar felt his empire's reputation crumbling around him. His supposedly invincible fleet had been neutralized without a single shot being fired in retaliation. The Keth Mori were the ones who demonstrated overwhelming superiority. They were the ones who crushed resistance with irresistible force. Now they were helpless victims of an enemy they had completely underestimated. I don't understand, Zektar transmitted. How did you develop this technology so quickly? We didn't develop it quickly, Admiral Chen replied. We developed it carefully. Humanity has been preparing for this moment since our first contact with galactic civilization. We knew that eventually we would face a threat like the Keth Mori hegemony. A new display appeared showing Earth itself. The planet was surrounded by defensive platforms that made the Jupiter installations look primitive by comparison. Massive structures rotated in orbital configurations that hurt to look at directly. Every human settlement you destroyed was monitored by hidden sensors. Every attack you conducted was recorded and analyzed. We used your own testing program to gather intelligence about your capabilities and limitations. Zektar realized the full scope of his defeat. The Keth Mori hadn't been testing humanity. Humanity had been studying the Keth Mori. Every successful attack had actually been a learning opportunity for their enemies. What happens now? Zektar asked. Now you face justice, Admiral Chen replied. The Galactic Council refused to act on our evidence, so humanity will act alone. Every Keth Mori officer involved in the attacks on civilian settlements will be tried for genocide. Every ship used in those attacks will be confiscated. Every world suffering under Keth Mori occupation will be offered independence and protection. The transmission shifted to show detention facilities where Keth Mori officers were being processed. Captain Thekva appeared on screen, looking older and more tired than when Zektar had last seen him. High Consul, Thekva said, they know everything. Not just about our recent operations, but about campaigns going back decades. They have evidence of every species we've destroyed, every world we've conquered through false flag operations. Zektar felt the weight of 1,000 years of conquest coming back to haunt his empire. How many civilizations had the Keth Mori destroyed using the same tactics they had tried on humanity? How many innocent people had died in accidents that were actually systematic murder? You thought no one would notice, Admiral Chen said, her image returning to the screen. You thought the death of my niece at the edge of nowhere would be quickly forgotten. You were wrong. Maya Chen appeared on screen one final time, frozen in her moment of innocent excitement as death approached her home. But now her image was surrounded by the emblems of 30 species that had allied with humanity. The little girl's death had exposed a conspiracy that stretched across the galaxy. The Keth Mori hegemony is finished. Admiral Chen announced. Your military is defeated, your crimes are exposed, and your victims will have justice. The galaxy will know what you really are. Zektar looked around his disabled flagship at officers who could no longer meet his eyes. His empire had been built on fear and the illusion of invincibility. Both were now shattered beyond repair. What about me? Zektar asked quietly. Admiral Chen's expression showed no mercy. You will stand trial for genocide. You will answer for every innocent life your empire has taken. You will face the families of your victims and explain why you thought their children didn't matter. The human fleet began moving the captured Kethmori ships toward Earth. Zektar watched his empire's proud warships being towed like broken toys by vessels that represented everything he had failed to understand about humanity. As Earth grew larger in the view screen, Zektar thought about Maya Chen's final moments. She had been excited about the pretty lights that were coming to kill her. She had died without knowing that her death would expose a conspiracy of genocide that had lasted for centuries. The little girl at the edge of nowhere had noticed, and through her humanity had noticed. And now the entire galaxy would know what happened when someone decided that human lives didn't matter. The Kethmori had thought they were testing a weak species. Instead, they had awakened something that would reshape the balance of power in the galaxy. They had learned too late that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology or their weapons. It was their memory, and they never forgot their own. Captain Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the UHMS Mercy, watching the stars blur past through the massive viewport. The hospital ship was enormous, stretching over 2 kilometers from bow to stern. White hull plating gleamed under the running lights, and bright red crosses marked every surface. Anyone looking at the Mercy would know immediately what it was. A ship built to heal, not to harm. Captain, we're approaching the Kepler 442 system, announced Lieutenant Torres from the navigation station. Long-range sensors are picking up multiple distress signals. Sarah nodded grimly. The reports coming out of this system had been terrible. The Zephyrian Empire and the Hegemony Alliance had been fighting here for months. Neither side cared about the civilians caught in the middle. Human colonies, alien settlements, refugee ships, all of them were suffering. How many signals? Sarah asked. 17 confirmed distress beacons, Captain. Mix of human and alien frequencies. Torres paused, checking his instruments. Looks like there's a refugee convoy trapped near the 4th planet. They're reporting critical medical emergencies. Dr. Marcus Webb appeared on the bridge, still wearing his surgical scrubs. The chief medical officer looked tired, but his eyes were bright with determination. He had volunteered for this mission specifically because he knew how bad things were out here. Sarah, my teams are ready, he said. We've got operating rooms prepared for every species we might encounter. The biolabs have synthesized medicine for Zephyrian, hegemony, and human physiology. What about the children's ward? Sarah asked. That was always her biggest concern. Wars hurt everyone, but children suffered the most. Dr. Kim has the pediatric section fully equipped. We can handle anything from malnutrition to combat trauma. Marcus's voice was steady, professional. The Mercy was built for this, Sarah. We can save lives here. The bridge's main screen flickered to life, showing a tactical display of the Kepler 442 system. Red dots marked conflict zones. Yellow dots showed distress signals. It looked like a disease spreading across space. Captain, called the communications officer, we're receiving a transmission from the Hegemony refugee convoy. They're requesting immediate medical assistance. They have over 300 wounded civilians aboard their ships. Sarah felt her chest tighten. 300 people, maybe more, depending on how badly they were hurt. But that was exactly why the Mercy existed. Signal the convoy that we're coming, she ordered. Send our medical transponder codes on all frequencies. I want everyone in this system to know we're here as healers, not fighters. The ship's AI spoke in its calm, neutral voice. Medical neutrality protocols are now active. All weapon systems are powered down and locked. Medical transponders are broadcasting on emergency frequencies. The UHMS Mercy is operating under Galactic Medical Convention protections. Sarah had insisted on those protocols. The Mercy carried some defensive weapons, shields and point defense systems to protect against debris and pirates. But when they were on a medical mission, everything that could be seen as threatening was shut down. They were healers first, last, and always. Ma'am, Torres said quietly, I'm reading Zephyrian military ships in the outer system. Looks like a patrol fleet. Are they moving toward us? No, ma'am. They're holding position near the gas giant. Probably watching us, though. Sarah wasn't worried. The Galactic Medical Convention was clear. Hospital ships displaying proper markings and following neutrality protocols were protected. Even the aggressive Zephyrians had signed that treaty decades ago. No civilized species would fire on a clearly marked medical vessel. Dr. Webb moved to the tactical display, studying the locations of the distress signals. Sarah, if we can reach the refugee convoy first, we can establish a triage center on one of their larger ships. Then we can move through the system, picking up the worst cases. How long will that take? Days, maybe weeks. But we can save thousands of lives. The Mercy's crew was used to long missions. They had responded to natural disasters, plague outbreaks, and war zones across human space. The ship carried enough medical supplies to treat an entire planet. Its crew of 3,000 included some of the best doctors, nurses, and medical technicians in human space. Captain, the communications officer spoke up again. The refugee convoy is transmitting medical data. They have injured from both sides of the conflict, hegemony civilians and some Zephyrian non-combatants who were caught in the fighting. Sarah felt a surge of pride in her crew. This was what humanity did best. When others saw enemies, humans saw patients who needed help. When others saw different species, humans saw people who were suffering. Dr. Webb, can your teams handle mixed species casualties? That's what we trained for, Marcus replied. The Mercy was designed specifically for this kind of situation. We have medical protocols for every known sapient species. The ship shuddered slightly as it dropped out of hyperspace near the refugee convoy. Through the viewport, Sarah could see the ragged collection of ships, cargo haulers, passenger transports, even some small personal craft. All of them were overloaded with refugees fleeing the war. My God, whispered Torres. Look at them. The refugee ships were damaged and overcrowded. Some showed obvious signs of weapons fire. Others looked ready to fall apart from engine failure. Sarah could see people pressed against windows in the passenger sections, looking desperately toward the Mercy. All stations, prepare for emergency medical operations, Sarah announced over the ship's intercom. This is what we came here to do. Let's save some lives. Dr. Webb was already heading toward the medical bays. I'll get the surgical teams ready. We're going to be busy. The Mercy's shuttle bays opened and medical shuttles began launching toward the refugee convoy. Each shuttle was clearly marked with medical symbols and carried teams of doctors and nurses. They would establish treatment centers on the refugee ships and begin bringing the worst cases back to the Mercy. Sarah watched the rescue operation begin and felt a familiar sense of purpose. This was why she had joined the medical service instead of the military. Humanity had enough warriors. What the galaxy needed was healers. Captain, Torres said, checking his sensors again. The Zephyrian patrol fleet is changing course. They're moving in our direction. Probably just curious about what we're doing, Sarah replied. Keep monitoring them, but don't worry unless they power weapons or lock targeting systems. The Mercy's medical transponders were broadcasting continuously, identifying the ship as a protected medical vessel. The red crosses on the hull were lit up like beacons. Any species that looked at the Mercy would know exactly what it was and what it was doing. As the first medical shuttles reached the refugee convoy, Sarah felt hopeful. The Mercy could make a real difference here. They could save lives and maybe even help end this terrible war by showing both sides that some things were more important than fighting. She had no idea that in the command center of the Zephyrian patrol fleet, Admiral Korthak was staring at the image of the human hospital ship with growing anger. To him, any human presence in this system was a threat to the Zephyrian Empire's mission. The fact that they claimed to be healers only made them more dangerous. The Mercy continued its rescue operations, unaware that death was approaching through the darkness of space. President Elena Vasquez was in her morning briefing when the emergency transmission reached Earth. She was reviewing trade agreements and colony reports when Admiral Harrison burst into the Oval Office without being announced. Madam President, you need to see this immediately, he said, his face grim. We just received an emergency beacon from the Kepler 442 system. Elena looked up from her papers, concerned. Emergency beacons from that far out usually meant natural disasters or equipment failures. What's the situation, Admiral? Instead of answering, Harrison activated the wall display. The image that appeared made Elena's blood turn cold. She was looking at the bridge of the UHMS Mercy. Captain Chen was speaking into the emergency transmitter, blood running down her face. Behind her, the bridge was filling with smoke and sparks. They fired on a clearly marked hospital ship, Captain Chen was saying. We were trying to save their children, too. The transmission cut to exterior camera feeds showing the Mercy under attack by Zephyrian destroyers. The massive hospital ship, clearly marked with red crosses and medical symbols, was being torn apart by military weapons. Elena watched in horror as medical bays full of patients simply vanished under weapons fire. But the worst was yet to come. The feed switched to footage from the escape pods. Elena saw medical shuttles marked with red crosses being hunted down by Zephyrian fighters. She watched rescue workers in medical scrubs being executed in the vacuum of space. She saw children's bodies floating among the wreckage of the pediatric ward. My God, Elena whispered. How many people were on that ship? 3,000 medical personnel, Admiral Harrison replied grimly. Early reports suggest less than 900 survivors. Elena felt sick. The Mercy had been humanity's pride, the largest and most advanced hospital ship ever built. It had responded to disasters across human space, saving lives without regard for species or politics. The crew had been volunteers, people who had dedicated their lives to healing. Madam President, Harrison continued, the footage is already spreading across human space. Every colony, every space station, every ship is receiving this transmission. Elena understood immediately. This wasn't just an attack on a single ship. This was an attack on everything humanity stood for. The Mercy had represented the best of human nature, the willingness to help others even at personal risk. Get me a connection to the Global Assembly, Elena ordered. Emergency session. I want every representative there within the hour. As word spread, the reaction across human space was immediate and explosive. On Mars, workers in the orbital shipyard stopped their jobs to watch the footage. On Alpha Centauri, colony administrators called emergency meetings. On Proxima Station, off-duty military personnel began requesting immediate transfer to active duty. The footage was impossible to ignore or dismiss. It showed clearly marked medical personnel being hunted down and killed while trying to save lives. It showed a hospital ship being destroyed while broadcasting medical neutrality codes. It showed the execution of wounded civilians in escape pods. In the Global Assembly on Earth, representatives from every human world and station gathered in emergency session. The chamber that usually echoed with political debate was silent as they watched the footage from Kepler 442. Representative Chen from New Beijing was the first to speak, her voice shaking with anger. The Galactic Medical Convention exists to protect exactly this kind of mission. The Zephyrians signed that treaty. They knew what they were doing. Representative Jackson from Luna nodded grimly. This wasn't a mistake or an accident in the heat of battle. They specifically targeted medical personnel and executed survivors. President Vasquez stood at the podium, looking out at the assembled representatives. She had seen them argue about everything from trade routes to colonial taxes. But today she saw something she had never seen before. Complete unity. Fellow representatives, she began, we face a decision that will define humanity's place in the galaxy. For decades, we have pursued peace. We have tried to be healers and builders rather than warriors. The Mercy represented the best of those ideals. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. Today, that ship and everyone aboard it was murdered. Not destroyed in battle, not lost to accident or disaster, but murdered while trying to save lives, including the lives of Zephyrian civilians. Representative Martinez from Europa stood up. Madam President, what are you proposing? Elena's voice hardened. I'm proposing that we show the galaxy what happens when you attack human medical personnel. I'm proposing that we remind the Zephyrian Empire why humanity has ships capable of more than healing. The debate that followed was unlike anything in the Global Assembly's history. Representatives who had been pacifists for decades called for military action. Worlds that had never contributed to military spending began offering resources for a war fleet. Representative Foster from Titan, a man who had opposed every military budget in his 20-year career, stood to address the chamber. I have spent my entire political life advocating for peace. I believed that violence was never the answer. But after watching that footage, I understand something new. Peace is only possible when those who would commit atrocities know there will be consequences. The vote was unanimous. Every human world, every station, every colony agreed to contribute to a military response. Even the pacifist worlds of the Tau Ceti system, which had refused to maintain any military forces, offered to convert their cargo ships into troop transports. Within hours, the orders went out across human space. Orbital shipyards that hadn't built military vessels in decades began retooling their production lines. Cargo ships were being converted into troop transports. Merchant vessels were being fitted with military-grade weapons. But most importantly, a call went out to Admiral Jonathan Hayes. Hayes was 73 years old and had been retired for 8 years. He lived quietly on a farm in the mountains of Colorado, tending to his garden and writing memoirs of his military service. He had commanded human forces during the Proxima conflict 15 years earlier, and was considered one of the finest tactical minds in human space. When the military transport landed on his property, Hayes already knew why they had come. He had seen the footage from the Mercy like everyone else. General Morrison stepped out of the transport, looking uncomfortable about disturbing the old admiral's retirement. "Sir, the President has requested that you come out of retirement to command the response fleet." Hayes looked at the transport, then back at his garden. He had hoped never to see military action again, but the images from Kepler 442 had changed everything. "How large a fleet are we talking about, General?" "Current projections suggest over 2,000 ships, sir. Every world is contributing something." Hayes nodded slowly. He had commanded large fleets before, but never anything approaching that size. "And our objective?" "The President was very clear, sir. The Zephyrian Empire needs to understand that attacking human medical personnel will have consequences. Severe consequences." That night, as Hayes packed his old uniform, he thought about the crew of the Mercy. 3,000 people who had dedicated their lives to healing others. People who had traveled across the galaxy to save lives without regard for species or politics. They had died because they chose to heal rather than harm, and now their deaths would be answered with the largest military fleet in human history. The next morning, Admiral Hayes reported to Earth Command. His first order was simple but profound. "Signal every shipyard, every world, every station. Tell them we're building a fleet that will make sure this never happens again." Across human space, the message was received and understood. Humanity had tried peace. They had tried to be healers and builders, but when their healers were murdered, they would become something else entirely. The sleeping giant was awakening, and its anger would shake the galaxy. Admiral Jonathan Hayes stood on the bridge of the UHS Retribution, looking out at the largest fleet ever assembled by humanity. 2,847 ships stretched across space in formation. Massive dreadnoughts floated alongside converted cargo haulers bristling with hastily mounted weapons. Sleek destroyers moved in formation with retrofitted passenger liners carrying assault troops. It had taken 6 months to assemble this fleet. 6 months during which every human world had contributed ships, weapons, supplies, and crew members. The elderly admiral had watched with amazement as humanity's industrial capacity revealed itself. Shipyards that had been building cargo vessels began producing destroyers. Mining stations started manufacturing ammunition. Even luxury cruise ships had been converted into troop transports. "Admiral," reported Captain Torres, the same young officer who had survived the Mercy's destruction and now served as Hayes's fleet communications coordinator. "Final squadron reports are coming in. All ships are ready for hyperspace jump." Hayes nodded. Torres had volunteered for this mission specifically, like many of the Mercy survivors. 847 people had lived through that attack, and every single one who was medically able had joined the response fleet in some capacity. Captain Torres signaled the fleet. "Begin broadcasting the Mercy footage on all frequencies as we enter Zephyrian space. I want every ship in their territory to see what their military did." The hyperspace jump to Zephyrian territory took 3 days. When the human fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Corvinus system, their first action wasn't to attack. Instead, every ship began broadcasting the footage from the Mercy's destruction. The images showed clearly marked medical personnel being executed in space. They showed a hospital ship being torn apart while broadcasting medical neutrality codes. They showed Zephyrian fighters hunting down escape pods filled with wounded civilians. Admiral Korthak, the same Zephyrian commander who had ordered the attack on the Mercy, was now in charge of the Corvinus defense fleet. When his sensors detected the approaching human armada, he couldn't believe the readings. "How many ships?" he demanded. 2,847 confirmed contacts, his sensor officer replied, his voice shaking. "Admiral, This is larger than our entire military combined." Korthak stared at the tactical display. The human fleet was massive beyond anything he had imagined possible. But what disturbed him more was their formation. They weren't arranged like conquerors coming to claim territory. They were arranged like executioners coming to deliver justice. The human fleet's broadcast reached his command ship. Korthak watched the footage of the Mercy's destruction, his own handiwork from 6 months ago. At the time, it had seemed like a simple tactical decision. Remove human interference from Zephyrian operations. Now, watching the images of medical workers being killed in space, he began to understand what he had unleashed. Admiral Hayes opened a communication channel to the Zephyrian fleet. His voice was calm, professional, and absolutely terrifying in its certainty. "Zephyrian forces, this is Admiral Jonathan Hayes of the United Human Fleet. 6 months ago, your forces attacked and destroyed the hospital ship UHMS Mercy while it was conducting humanitarian operations. 3,000 medical personnel were killed while trying to save lives, including Zephyrian civilian lives." Hayes paused, letting that sink in. "We are here to ensure that such an atrocity never happens again. Any Zephyrian military vessel that does not immediately surrender will be destroyed. You have 10 minutes to decide." Korthak felt rage build in his chest. "How dare these humans threaten the Zephyrian Empire? Human Admiral, by what right do you bring a war fleet into Zephyrian space?" Hayes's response was immediate and cold. "By the right of those who heal being protected from those who murder." The 10-minute deadline passed without any Zephyrian surrenders. Admiral Hayes gave a simple order: begin operations. What followed wasn't a battle in any traditional sense. It was a systematic demonstration of what happened when humanity's industrial capacity was focused on warfare instead of commerce. The human fleet moved through Zephyrian space like a force of nature, destroying military installations with methodical precision. But this wasn't random destruction. Every target was specifically chosen. The humans attacked weapons manufacturing plants. They destroyed military shipyards. They eliminated command and control centers. But they carefully avoided civilian targets and made sure to broadcast warnings before attacking anything that might have non-combatants nearby. The Zephyrian military tried to fight back, but they were completely overwhelmed. Their ships had been designed to fight other similar fleets in traditional battles. They had no answer for the human fleet's massive size and overwhelming firepower. At the Battle of Corvanus Station, Admiral Korthak made his final stand. His remaining fleet of 200 ships faced Admiral Hayes' full armada. The battle lasted less than an hour. Hayes watched from the Retribution's bridge as the Zephyrian fleet was systematically destroyed. These were the same ships that had attacked the Mercy. Some of them had probably fired the shots that killed Dr. Webb and the children in the pediatric ward. "Admiral," Torres reported, "Korthak's flagship is crippled but still broadcasting." "Put him through." Korthak's image appeared on the main screen. The Zephyrian admiral was wounded and his bridge was filled with smoke, but his eyes still held defiance. "You may destroy our fleet, human, but you cannot destroy the Zephyrian Empire. We are spread across hundreds of worlds." Hayes studied the alien commander who had ordered the attack on a hospital ship. "Admiral Korthak, we're not here to destroy your empire. We're here to teach you a lesson about the cost of murdering medical personnel." "What do you mean?" "Every military vessel in your fleet has been identified and marked for destruction. Every weapons factory, every military shipyard, every command center will be eliminated. When we're finished, the Zephyrian Empire will have no ability to threaten medical ships anywhere in the galaxy." Korthak's eyes widened as he understood the scope of what the humans were planning. "That will take years. It will require enormous resources." Hayes smiled grimly. "Admiral, you attacked 3,000 medical workers who were trying to save lives. Did you think we would respond with anything less than our full capacity?" The human fleet spread out across Zephyrian space, dividing into smaller task forces that hit multiple targets simultaneously. They moved with the efficiency of a well-planned surgical operation, cutting out the Zephyrian military's ability to wage war while leaving civilian infrastructure intact. Word of the human campaign spread across the galaxy. Other species watched in amazement as humanity demonstrated that their peaceful nature had limits. The same industrial capacity that had built hospital ships and research stations was now building the largest war fleet ever seen. But what impressed other species most was the precision of the human campaign. They weren't conquering territory or enslaving populations. They were specifically eliminating the ability to threaten medical personnel. Every attack was preceded by broadcasts of the Mercy footage, making it clear why this was happening. The Hegemony Alliance, which had been fighting the Zephyrians for years, offered to join the human campaign. Admiral Hayes politely declined their assistance. "This isn't about choosing sides in your conflict," he explained to the Hegemony ambassador. "This is about establishing a principle. Anyone who attacks clearly marked medical vessels will face consequences." 3 months after entering Zephyrian space, the human fleet had achieved its objectives. Every major Zephyrian military installation had been destroyed or captured. Their fleet was reduced to a handful of patrol boats. Their weapons manufacturing capability was eliminated. But Admiral Hayes wasn't finished yet. The final phase of the operation would send a message that would echo across the galaxy for generations to come. The human fleet gathered at Zephyr Prime, the Zephyrian homeworld, 2,000 ships in perfect formation, broadcasting the footage from the Mercy's destruction for all to see. Admiral Hayes stood in the Zephyrian Capitol building, looking across the negotiation table at the Empire's leadership. The Zephyrian High Council had requested peace talks after watching their military capability systematically eliminated over 3 months of human operations. High Counselor Verak, the elderly leader of the Zephyrian Empire, looked tired and defeated. His empire's military was gone. Their shipyards were destroyed. Their weapons factories were rubble. But the humans had been careful to avoid civilian targets, and Zephyrian society remained intact. "Admiral Hayes," Verak said quietly, "what are your terms for ending this war?" Hayes had prepared for this moment. The terms had been decided by the Global Assembly and approved by every human world. They weren't about conquest or revenge. They were about ensuring this never happened again. "First," Hayes began, "Admiral Korthak and every officer who participated in the attack on the Mercy will stand trial for war crimes. The proceedings will be conducted by a joint tribunal including human, hegemony, and neutral species representatives." Verak nodded reluctantly. Korthak was already in human custody after his flagship was captured. "Second, the Zephyrian Empire will pay reparations to the families of every person killed in the attack. This includes not just the human crew, but the Zephyrian and hegemony civilians who were patients aboard the Mercy." "That could take decades to pay," protested another council member. Hayes' expression didn't change. "The Mercy was on a humanitarian mission to save Zephyrian civilians when your forces destroyed it. Those families deserve compensation for their loss." "What else?" Verak asked. "Third, and most importantly, the Zephyrian Empire will sign and ratify the Galactic Medical Protection Protocols. Any species that attacks clearly marked medical vessels will face immediate consequences from humanity and our allies." Hayes activated a holographic display showing the current state of galactic politics. Over the past 3 months, dozens of species had approached human representatives requesting alliance treaties. The systematic elimination of Zephyrian military power had impressed many governments who were looking for strong partners. "As you can see," Hayes continued, "we're no longer alone in this. 17 species have already signed preliminary agreements to enforce medical neutrality. Any future attacks on hospital ships will face a combined response." Verak studied the display with growing concern. The human campaign had changed the balance of power across the galaxy. Species that had never considered humanity particularly important were now eager to ally with them. "You've turned the entire galaxy against us," Verak said bitterly. "No," Hayes replied firmly. "You did that when you attacked a hospital ship. We're simply making sure there are consequences for that choice." The negotiations continued for 3 days. The Zephyrian Empire agreed to all human demands. They had no choice. Their military was gone and their economy was dependent on trade with species that were now allied with humanity. But Admiral Hayes wasn't finished. There was one more ceremony that needed to take place. 2 weeks later, a memorial service was held aboard the UHS Mercy II, the new hospital ship that had been built to replace the destroyed vessel. The Mercy II was even larger than the original, with more medical bays and better defensive systems. More importantly, it was accompanied by an escort fleet of 6 destroyers. Admiral Hayes stood at the podium in the ship's main assembly hall, looking out at the gathered crowd. Survivors from the original Mercy sat in the front rows. Behind them were representatives from dozens of species, including some Zephyrians who had come to pay their respects. "We gather today to remember the crew of the UHMS Mercy," Hayes began. 3,000 people who dedicated their lives to healing others. They died because they chose to help rather than harm. They died because they saw patients instead of enemies. He paused, looking specifically at Captain Torres and the other survivors. The crew of the Mercy believed that some things were more important than politics or territory, or species differences. They believed that suffering should be relieved wherever it was found. They believed that healing was more important than killing. Hayes's voice grew stronger as he continued. 6 months ago, the Zephyrian Empire learned what happens when you attack people who hold those beliefs. They learned that a species compassionate enough to cross the galaxy to heal the wounded is also capable of terrible retribution against those who would harm healers. The audience was silent, remembering the images from the Mercy's destruction and the systematic campaign that followed. Today we launch the Mercy 2. Like her predecessor, she will carry medical teams to wherever they are needed. But unlike her predecessor, she will not travel alone. The galaxy now understands that anyone who threatens human medical personnel will face consequences. Hayes gestured toward the escort ships, visible through the assembly hall's windows. These destroyers are not here to conquer or threaten. They are here to ensure that healers can do their work in safety. They are here to make sure that what happened to the first Mercy never happens again. Dr. Susan Chen, Dr. Webb's former assistant who had survived the attack, stood to address the gathering. She had been promoted to Chief Medical Officer of the Mercy 2. "The crew of the original Mercy died trying to save lives," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Including the lives of Zephyrian children. They held to their principles even when faced with death. Our job is to continue their work." She looked out at the mixed crowd of humans and aliens. "The Mercy 2 will respond to medical emergencies anywhere in the galaxy, regardless of species or politics. We will treat anyone who needs help. But now the galaxy knows that if you harm medical personnel, humanity will remember." The service concluded with the reading of names and all 3,000 crew members who had died aboard the original Mercy. Each name was followed by a moment of silence and the ringing of a ship's bell. As the ceremony ended, Admiral Hayes received a priority message from Earth. The Global Assembly had approved funding for 12 new hospital ships and their escort fleets. Humanity was expanding its medical service while ensuring those medical teams would be protected. But more importantly, the Galactic Medical Protection Protocols had been signed by 43 species. The network of alliances created by humanity's response to the Mercy attack was becoming a foundation for galactic peace. 3 months later, Admiral Hayes retired again, returning to his farm in Colorado. But his work was done. The principle had been established across the galaxy. Those who healed would be protected, and those who harmed healers would face consequences. The UHS Mercy 2 departed on its first mission a week after the memorial service. Its destination was a plague outbreak in the Rigel system. 6 destroyers escorted the hospital ship, their weapons powered but their crews hoping never to use them. As they entered hyperspace, Dr. Chen stood in the Mercy 2's medical bay, watching her staff prepare for the mission ahead. The bay looked exactly like the one where Dr. Webb had worked on the original Mercy. The same equipment, the same layout, the same dedication to saving lives. But there was one important difference. On the wall of every medical bay was a plaque listing the names of the 3,000 crew members who had died aboard the first Mercy. Below their names was a simple inscription: "They died healing others. We live to continue their work, and the galaxy remembers the price of harming those who heal." The Mercy 2 and its escorts jumped to hyperspace, carrying humanity's message to the stars. "We will heal whoever needs healing, and we will protect those who do the healing." The galaxy had learned that humanity's compassion came with a promise of retribution for those who would harm the compassionate. And in his retirement, Admiral Hayes tended his garden and knew that the universe was a little bit safer for those who chose to heal rather than harm.